Education. So let us not prolong the agony of waiting and let us move forward to one of the highlights of this event. Welcome everyone to the International Education Symposium 2022 Education Leaders Talk.
Let us keep the igniting fire within us as we welcome on the virtual stage our prominent and respectable speakers for today, all the way from Malaysia, Japan, and Indonesia. Starting with our first speaker for today. She is recognized as a senior assessor in the Malaysian Quality Agency and a master trainer in the Malaysian Higher Education Leadership Academy, in which she develops modules and facilitates the professional growth of fellow academics across the nation. She has received both international and national research grants and published in various index journals and book chapters, all within the areas of adult and higher education, TESOL, and professional development. And in terms of networking, she has been appointed as an academic assessor by both international and national ministries and higher education institutions. She has also been invited as keynote speakers in several international conferences and of late series of webinars. Also, based on her involvement and achievements in the field of adult education, she was awarded the Distinguished Scientist in Adult Education by Venus International Foundation based in India in 2019. And on top of all that, her family and friends have known her as someone who is cheerful and passionate. Married with 3 children, and she believes in family is always first. Let us welcome on the virtual stage Professor in Adult and Higher Education at the Faculty of Education UiTM and currently the Director of Academic Development and Management at the Institute of Continuing Education and Professional Studies, no other than Professor Dr. Faizah Abdul Majid with her topic entitled Teachers' Craftsmanship, Attuning Human Values Amidst Crisis.
Recording in progress.
Teachers.
Okay.
Recording stopped.
Okay, a very good morning to everybody. My first order of business is to actually say thank you.
Recording in progress.
To both hosts that we have this morning, and of course to all the participants who are waiting since this morning and God willing until tomorrow. And I look forward to share with you my thoughts. As you have heard earlier on, this is an additional talk series, and allow me to be the first to share with you what I have in mind. And frankly speaking, I am in love with the theme of the symposium simply because I think it's very timely that we talk about values on top of all the hard skills or the soft skills. It's really an important word. Values, and is really an important concept that everybody needs to really understand. And for that notion, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow colleagues, and also I could assume there are also students amongst us this morning, my title that I like to share with you is as per seen on the screen, Teachers' Craftsmanship, Attuning Human Values Amidst Crisis Through Thinker Teachers. Now, I'm sure you'll be wondering, what do I mean by craftsmanship? Looking at the theme of our symposium, I thought teachers are the agent of transformation. And how is it that we are the agent of transformation? The beautiful work that we do with our bare hands. Look, and craftsmanship is basically all about coming up with something beautiful using your bare hand. All right? And attuning human values amidst crisis through thinker teachers. I like the word crisis there. And I hope you would bear in mind, put that as a mental note at our side, that we are going to talk about all this in the context of facing the crisis. What do I mean by crisis? Hang on to that mental note. It will come in a while, God willing. And I like the term attuning. So often, if not, so often than not, we tend to forget the role or the impact that teachers can give to their students by the simple virtue of delivering the content to our students. facilitating the growth or the learning and the professional growth of our student. Little that we realized that in our approach, we could actually attune human values. And how is it that we attune? If you were to look up for the meaning of attuning, if we could go to the next slide, please, host. Or can I do it? Okay, all right. All right, the next slide, please. The next slide, please. Okay, so if we were to look at the word attuning human values, it's about talking about bringing the harmony into the human values. And in this instance, when we talk about harmony, it's all about how is it that we play our role as a teacher, and how is it that we emphasize or we encourage the role of our learners, our students, so that human values are all together integrated in the teaching and learning process. But I leave behind two important key terms, human values and thinker teachers, for you to discover as you take a listen to what I have to say in a while. Now, if we could go back to the previous slide, host, and the previous one, this is what I have in mind. There are 6 things that I like to share with you as we go along. I believe I have about 40 minutes to deliver. I've already spoken about the keywords. And for the next few sessions I have with you to talk about the future ahead and what do we mean by crisis and the potential crisis that we are facing. And as I believe in teachers' craftsmanship, I like to also highlight one of the important concepts of being a professional teacher, that is through reflective teaching. And when we talk about reflective teaching, we can't run away from being thinkers. And this is a term which I coined last year, yeah? Thinker teachers. Through my professoral lecture, I talk about thinker teachers. And I believe that not every single teacher could understand what it means by thinker teachers. Hence, I thought it is due time that I bring it up again. And in responding to the theme of the symposium, allow me to explore also the notion of human voice embodiment. And how do we do that? Allow me to share with you some observation, some experiences I have through sharing with you the teaching strategies and some classroom practices. Okay, onwards, shall we proceed to the 3 slides forward? Yeah. And the next one, please. Okay. Jeremy Bruner is a famous person in education. And I always like to refer to Jeremy Bruner simply because he tells us the idea why we are teachers. We are not the content owner. We are not we are not there to dictate knowledge, but rather we are there to assist or to facilitate our students' professional development and personal growth as a human being, as well as a potential productive citizen of the country and also citizen of the world. So in this instance, it's all about making our students become holistic. It's not just about being competent and proficient in the respective subject matter, but also to understand how that knowledge or how those skills that they have actually been trained via the conduct of our courses, they could actually contribute back to the world, to the nation, to the society, to the community, to their own family, and to themselves, from the bigger picture to the very micro unit of that individual person. So as Jeremy Bruner had rightfully mentioned in 1966, knowledge is a process. It's not just a product. Can we please proceed to the next slide? Okay, in Malaysia, I am so excited to know that there are also participants from Myanmar, Thailand, the Philippines, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Japan. Now, at this point of time, since I'm from Malaysia, I like to share with you from our Ministry of Education. And as I share this with you, ladies and gentlemen, try to recall what is it that we have. This is what we call as the philosophy of education, the national philosophy of education. And to assist our understanding this morning, I have actually brought some of the phrases over there. And as you can see in the first line, it says in Malaysia, what is education in Malaysia? And I truly believe it's also similar in all the other countries, across the globe, especially in your respective country. So education has always been seen as an ongoing effort. It's not just about preparing students for the final year exam of the respective year, it's not just about preparing students for the final public examination before they enter the university. It's not just about preparing students so that they could graduate and securing a job upon graduation. It's actually helping the student to understand that they are one leader, virtue of leaders are instilled in them, as I have mentioned earlier, from the globe up to the individual context. How are they contributing so that things are harmonious in the context wherever he or she is in present. So in order to do that, we're talking about developing the potential. And when we talk about potential, it's not just about the cognition, it's not just about the cognitive, it's also about the spiritual, the emotional, as well as the physical, and they need to be balanced and harmonious. And at the background of all this balancing act of these four important elements are the belief and devotion to God. So at the end of the day, there is always, regardless where we are, regardless what values we hold, regardless what religion we embrace, it is always the devotion to God, to the one God that we hold deeply. So what is it that we are responding to? What God has been teaching us, what it is told to us from generation to generation. How is it that we become in Islam, in Islam we call it Khalifa. How is it that we are the leaders amongst us? Everybody is a leader. Every one of us are responsible to ensure this world that we live in would be sustainable for the future generation. So that is what it means at that point of time. And towards the end, it's also talking about achieving that high level of personal well-being. How is it that personal well-being is very important? Because without personal well-being, how can that person be able to contribute to the harmony and betterment of the family, the society, and the nation at large? And if I were to also put that in the context of all of us from all parts of the world this morning, contribute to the nation and the universe, if I could say that, not just the world, the universe. Okay, shall we move on to the next slide? So what need to be factored in for the future ahead in realization of this philosophy of education? We also need to be realistic, to be objective with what is happening in the 21st century, in our country, in our society, in our community, in our school. So in that instance, in Malaysia, for example, we always have what we call the Department of Statistics in Malaysia. And I'm sure in every country, we also have Department of Statistics, which will release reports about employment, about gender equality or inequality, and so on and so forth, about gross income of the family, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure it's also happening in other countries. In Malaysia also, we've got one entity which we call Talent Corps that actually advises on what is actually relevant to be trained to our students. I'm talking about higher education. What kind of curriculum? Talent Corps, in a way, become the advisor to tell us this is what is needed in the industry. Especially now we've got IR 4.0 and henceforth Society 5.0. I'm going to come to that in a while. So when we talk about that, we are also inclined to understand the UNESCO's aspiration through the Sustainable Developmental Goals. There are 17 themes. I truly believe it does not mean that this is only to be absorbed at higher education. Even at kindergarten, as little as a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, they need to understand the 17 themes in the context of a child. You know, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about equality, we're talking about wellness, general well-being. They're all amongst the themes in SDG. All that need to be made realized in the context of our teaching and learning to the 3-year-old, to the 4-year-old, let alone to the 19, 20, or 24-year-old who are attending our classes at the higher education. And in order to also ascertain that our graduates can actually contribute to the nation, increasing the economy strength of their respective country, we need to also understand what is being reported in the World Economic Forum. So that is why I also have the WEF reports, understanding what are the skills in demand. WEF report have been telling us over and over again, 10 top soft skills, or rather skills, employability skills are required by the industry. And hence, I think, in order to understand that we are preparing productive citizens of the country, we need to understand what is it that we need to train them by understanding what was stated in the report. Okay, move on, please. The next slide, what I have is crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just gone through 2.5 years, I would say, of such a turmoil in our life when we were asked to embrace new norm quite immediately. It was just by a stroke of a lightning. Suddenly, our world changed. We needed to work from home. We needed to learn. We needed to study from home. We needed to multitask now that we are at home. We needed to have a new way of lifestyle when it comes to marketing, when it comes to getting what we need. Online purchase, online trading has become that new norm. Now, that has been the last 2.5 years. We are now in the endemic era where the pandemic is already in the past. But in the endemic era, transition to coming back to reality of a new life, there are many lessons that we could have learned from the pandemic. We're talking about the advancement of the technology and the digital platform. We're talking about how communicate. For example, look at us. We are from almost everywhere around the world, but here we are this morning with such minimal cost, with such a minimal time investment in preparing this symposium. Can you imagine having something like this about 4 or 5 years ago? I could imagine some flying over from Thailand and the Philippines and Malaysia for the coordination meetings. People don't believe in having online meeting at that point because they think there's no clear understanding and difficult to come up to mutual agreement if we were to done via online. We need to see face to face. That was the thought easily 3 or 4 years ago. But look at us now. Here we are attending the symposium and I'm talking to the screen. But I know I'm talking to easily 100 over or maybe more now that we are live, being stream live. So ladies and gentlemen, coming back to that new norm, that's the crisis. I think we have a new crisis. Some of my colleagues are also talking, can we go back to what it was? Since education in higher education now is saying that let's have hybrid. You can have your students online, you can have your students face to face. But there are also some who believe that no, let's have them back on campus face to face. And then I'm sure you have heard some words, some rumors saying, can we actually do it online fully? Because I think I can still teach my students online. And some of the students say that can we also do that because it's kind of difficult to find a house, rent a house near the campus due to the shortage of time of finding a proper place to stay. So there we're talking about when you want to resort back to what was, you need to understand the transition that needs to take place in order to make what you think is ideal to happen. So the new norm also means understanding the transition and the crisis that would happen during the transition. And when we talk about that, teachers, there was a time at the beginning of our pandemic, I was called to talk about pedagogy. This is a term coined by 2 educators from the UK. So you could Google them. Pedagogy is actually a pedagogy that is actually dependent on what is available, what is the resources available and what is it that you already have with you as well as your students. So it's all about teaching nonetheless, delivering nonetheless, ensuring learning takes place despite the context. And then when we talk about that, coming from pandemic to endemic, I think many papers have been written the last 2 or 3 years on pandemic, on COVID-19, and the way people look at the challenges, new set of challenges. And I think those papers, those articles, if we really study them, a meta-analysis on this challenges, particularly on the student challenges, you would understand they are crying out loud to us, the teachers, and maybe some of us are teachers to be, to actually understand their needs, their learning needs. And let me remind you, these are the Z generation. These are the digital natives. They live in the cyber world. They communicate, they do teamwork in the cyber world. But most of us educators are the millennials. A few of us are also from the X generation, and still a few more senior teachers are from the baby boomers. So these 3 generations of educators facing this new generation of the Z generation, there are digital gap. There are generation gap. That also means digital gap amongst this generation. So how is then, are we talking about the upcoming policy to ensure our educational policies are sustainable? We have these groups of educators with this generation values. We also have this group of students coming to us. So I suppose one of the crises we had Dr. Rudy, if I'm not mistaken, just now, yeah, who's who's in charge, the director, the regional director of education. Maybe these are the policies that respective department need to start considering. How is it that we are still supporting the ever-changing landscape of education? Okay, next slide, please. Reflective teaching, my third segment. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Now, if you are a student in the Faculty of Education, I'm sure Wallace is not a stranger. When we talk about the professional development of teachers, yeah, we're talking about reflective practice model. And as you can see on the screen, we are a lifelong learner. We never cease learning. We here, I'm referring to teachers. When you came into the teacher training college or the Faculty of Education, you'll be bringing with you what you think a teacher should be based on your experience as a student last time. You've got your role model, you've got your favorite teachers. And then you are in that formal setting where you receive methodology courses, pedagogical courses, the theoretical courses. So you are also experiencing new things besides what you are receiving. And when you go into school and start teaching, you are still learning because you are trying out things, experimenting. And the idea of reflecting on your own practice make you what we call that as
Recording stopped.
As a monitor to your own practices. And when this is cyclical, is never ending, it will, God willing, ensure that you are developing your competency as a professional teacher. That's the ideal goal. So that is why, if we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so one of the things when we teach, now I'm talking about in the context of us teaching, we are in the classroom, all right? We're in the classroom teaching. There are these three stages which are very important, the pre, the while, and the post. The pre-stage is when we need to do the planning. When we plan, the first thing that we need to always remember is our students. Have we considered the learning needs of our students? I have mentioned earlier about the Z generation. I've mentioned about earlier about how they have their way of preferences, yeah, their learning preferences, the platform, the tools that would entice them, that would make them more engaging in your lesson. While would refer to the interactive decision that you would make. Are you responding to the immediate needs of your students before your eyes? Evaluative, so the post stage is actually related to the evaluative decision. Upon finishing the class, going back to your office and preparing for the next class, what have you learned from the class that you have just conducted? What new things can you actually try to employ? Or if you were to be given a time to turn, what would be the changes that you do? And all this need to be thought about. Now, at this point of time, ladies and gentlemen, I like to relate to the crisis, the new norm, the endemic. People had the experience of pandemic. They have studied via online. They have studied by being self-directed and autonomous. You have trained them that the last 2.5 years. Do not forget that when you are back face-to-face. The students are autonomous trained, self-directed trained. They are able to be resourceful on their own, but what they need from you is your trust. What they need from you is your guidance and facilitation. Of course, they could go astray when they search for information, but when they come back to you, when they share with you what they have discovered, that is when you could ensure that they are on the right track. Okay, move on, please. Okay. That is why I really like this picture, this mug. Every morning I will look at this mug and I said, reminding myself, Faizah, you can only call yourself a teacher if you realize that you are always a learner. All right, okay, move on, please. Let's talk about thinker teachers, shall we? As I said earlier, I actually coined this term last year, yeah, when I delivered my professorial lecture. Okay, next slide. So this is the idea that I have. Next slide, please. What is thinking? Let's begin. In order to understand thinker-teacher concept, let's begin with thinking. Thinking is active, persistent, meaning all the time you never stop thinking. Even when you sleep, you think. That's why you got dreams or nightmare, to some of us. All right, because the mind is always, the brain is still working, yeah, and acting. But when it comes to thinking, the word that we need to really understand is careful consideration. of blah, 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 as you can see what was stated by Dewey in 1991. So if you were to follow my talk just a couple of minutes ago, when I said we are back now face-to-face, but we have had our 2.5 experiences, the students have been trained such skill, they are back with you, but carefully consider your new way of teaching approach. Now that you have a student who have had that 2.5 years of experience doing remote learning. So the new skill set, do not forget that. Okay, please proceed to the next slide. So from that thinker-teacher term that I coined, I've came up with these two formula, T equals T equals T. You are not teaching if you're not thinking. Thinking is equals to teaching, and teaching is equals to thinking. In this instance, I'm talking about thinking is central to teaching, and thinking is central in teaching. Two preposition. Central to teaching, that's why you are not a teacher if you are not a thinker. And thinking is central in teaching. You are not teaching unless you have taught your students thinking. Two important concepts. So that is why I've got another formula, which is IMT squared, referring to I'm a teacher, I'm a thinker. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the model, all right? I am also putting in students. Remember when I said that pre-stage just now, when you want to plan for your classes, you need to consider your students. And remember, these students had gone through pandemic, and these students have been trained by force. You know, they had the 2.5 years of remote learning. They had new skill set. They're coming back to you face-to-face now. So what is it that you do now in your teaching strategies? What is it that you do now, tasks that you give to your students? Think, all right? So that is why you yourself need to ensure the thinking happens within you as well as amongst your students. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. Okay, this is also, in a way, this is like a summary. What is it that we do when we talk about central to teaching? I'm talking about us as a lifelong learner. I'm talking us as the teacher decision-making who makes decision as effectively as possible. Reflective practice. And central in teaching at the top part of the screen, you will see is about practicing reflective teaching, where we encourage student empowerment, engagement. We ask a lot of questions, Socratic questioning. If you were to Google Socratic questioning, there are 6 types of Socratic questioning. And of course, the thinking hats, the white color hats, the black color hats, the green and the red color hats. If only I have a lot of time, I like to explore that further. But here I'm suggesting to you, go back to the basic of Socratic questioning technique and go back to that thinking hats and have activities based on this Socrates and the thinking hats, Edward de Bono's thinking hat. Okay, move on, please. So here, again, this is actually what I have said earlier. So if you could proceed to the next slide. Again, the art of questioning is the heart to deep learning. You cannot ensure that your students have learned deeply unless they're just learning surface and you're happy with that, because you just want them to give you back what you have told them. I'm not like that, and I'm sure many of us are not. I mean, maybe everybody here is not like that, yeah? We don't want our students to tell us what we have told them. We want our students to be able to apply what we have told them so that they can come up with something new, create something new. So in order to do that, we need to encourage our students to go into deep learning. And how is deep learning conducted? By asking a lot of questions in the classes. And teachers, we need to apply reflective teaching. Always question yourself, are you doing the right thing for your students? Okay, moving on to the next slide. So this one, constructivism, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I suppose at the very background of it, at the onset of it, at the foreground of it, ladies and gentlemen, the power of constructivism is always in place. It's all about assisting our students to become the co-curator or the curators of their knowledge, and our role as the co-curator. They curate the knowledge. This is what we mean by the higher order thinking by Bloom's. Yeah, at the top of it, it's about creation. How is it that our students are able to create something new based on what they have learned from us? Okay, move on to the next slide, please. So again, over and over again, in practicing thinker teachers, in reflective practice, these are the effort that we need to have. Becoming a reflective practitioner, as well as reflecting reflective teaching through the conduct of lessons through questioning, the art of questioning. In a way, I'm summarizing what I have just said earlier. So can we proceed to the next slide, please? Human values. Okay, the theme of our symposium this morning, values. Guys, I mentioned about values as a concept that we sometimes tend to overlook because we are so concerned about the subject matter. We are teaching them math, we're teaching them calculus, we're teaching them science. We need to make sure our students understand the theory. We need to ensure our students understand the periodic table. They need to be able to memorize, and they need to be able to reproduce, to come out with certain formula based on the periodic table, for example. But let's not forget, that's just the hard skill, the content. But what about the values? Why are they learning what we are trying to make them learn? Okay, let's move to the next slide, please. So if we were to look at embodying human values in teaching, ladies and gentlemen, frankly speaking, to my mind, because you did ask for my talk based on what I think this is the greatest challenge in the 21st century. Because why? As I said earlier, we face two types of gaps, the digital gaps and the generation gaps. The teachers would come from the baby boomers, the X generation, and the millennials. The youngest amongst us could be the millennials. But the students who are in our classes, they are the Z generation. And there are huge gaps between the Z generation and the baby boomers. There are also gaps between the Z generation and the X generation and the millennials. But the good thing about the X generation, we actually founded what is now in place for the Z generation. So I suppose the X generation are the adaptable ones of all the generation. Sorry if you don't agree with me, since I come from the X generation, I thought, yeah, we were at school in the 70s and in the 80s, and that gave rise to the technology now. So you wouldn't have all this gamification had we never had that, what we had in the 80s, in the 70s. Yeah. Okay, please proceed to the next slide. So Society 5.0, I recall earlier on, one of the VVIP, when they gave their opening speech, I was very touched when they talk about values amidst the digital technology advancement. So in Japan, we've got participants from Japan. The term Society 5.0 was actually coined in Japan in one of the economic symposium or other economic forums. And the specialist actually suggested that we need to also consider all these advancements of technology, all this Internet of Things, all this use of clouds and robotics, artificial intelligence. What are they doing to us as the human being? We created them not to just assist our work, but actually not to also ensure that we still remain manusia. In Malay, we call it manusia, or in English, it's called human being, mankind, right? So that is why it is not to create more disastrous events like what happened in Hiroshima during World War II, when a scientist discovered about atom. It was supposed to be for the good of the mass, not to be destruction of the mass. So here, Society 5.0 is relating to values embodiment of how advanced the technology is based on the advancement of the cognition or the education received by the human being, but they are all to come back to the SDG so that we have Society 5.0, where it is to be in harmony of why we are here at the first place, why God created mankind to live in the world. This is actually a responsibility given to us by God to ensure the world that He created for us will always be harmonious. So how do we do that? We are so active in coming up with creation and innovation and whatnot. But if we lack to also instill values in that, we might end up having another atomic bomb, impact, or rather that catastrophe, of having such innovation, yet not for the greater good, but to the destruction of the mass. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. Human values. Let's look at the fact that it comes from the word to be of worth, from Latin, valere, to be of worth. So in this instance, you can see on the screen at the bottom when I have highlighted, or I wrote bold some of the phrases. They are the virtues that guide us to take us into account the human element when we interact with each other. with each other of the human beings. So we're talking about respect, we're talking about love. So that is why, if you could see the next slide, please. These are the human values in the 21st century: non-violence, right conduct, peace, truth, love. You know, if you were to refer to the World Economic Forum report, the top 10 skills talk about cognitive flexibility, talk about the relevant soft skill. But what I think may have been overlooked is love, is peace, tolerance. It's not just about soft skill, it's also social skill. It's not just about emotional quotient, but it's also about social quotient. Okay, next please. So this one, I got it from the internet. Yeah, the source is on the screen at the bottom. I like the fact that it is actually love is in the middle. We are all excited this morning, right? We are excited to be here because we've got the love for education. We have the love to make sure that we are gaining something new each and every day. But coming back to values, ladies and gentlemen, the virtue of values is not just about love for education's sake, but it's actually love as thought in truth, love as action in what is right action, love as in feeling that goes to peace, love as understanding that will lead to violence, and love, all in all, is our nature. But that nature yet to be seen, integrated in our curriculum and the syllabus. How is it that we deliver and how is it that we make our students do? That it is actually based on this foundation of love. Okay, if we could move to the next slide, please. Okay, as a takeaway, this is my last segment for my talk this morning. As a takeaway, having heard what I have shared with you, I think it's only fair that I could also suggest some of the teaching strategies that you could do in ensuring that you are embodying the values in your classes, regardless of what subject you teach. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. So if you recall, okay, this is the definition of teaching strategies. Teaching strategies would encompass all the things that we do in the class. It could be the methods, it could be the techniques and the procedures and the processes, the materials you brought into class, the tasks that you make your students do, how you assess your students, how the kind of encouragement where the students need to interact with each other, the engagement opportunities, they are all under the teaching strategies. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. So remember I talked about the 3 stages, the pre, while, and post just now. Pre as in planning, while as in your interactive decision. When you are teaching, you need to still be thinking, you need to read the cues from your students and make changes where necessary. And post is when you reflect and hope to evaluate so that you can come back to that class with a better lesson conduct. So when you are to strategize at the pre stage level, remember I did say consider your student first. So that is why I said reach out to the students, talk to your students. It does not mean you only talk to the students when you are teaching them in class. Talk with them outside the classroom setting, outside the school setting. Look at what are they doing outside school. What are the activities they do amongst them? What are the things that entice them? So you could actually use that, manipulate that information so that you can strategize your materials, strategize your tasks, strategize your activities. So please, you need to consider the student factors and at that point of time also reflect on action, meaning how you have taught them in the past and how could it be different could you change or turn back time. And when it comes to WOW, the teaching strategy I'm suggesting is to focus on students' diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, we understand that students come from various backgrounds, family background, they have different personality, they've got different, in other words, their learning profiles. So to really celebrate the diversity of your students in the class, you need to make sure that there are activities meant for those in diverse groups. All right. So I think it's a lot of creativity on the part of the teacher. And at this point of time, this is where you could always embed the teaching. I think we've got universal values, regardless of what religion we are in. The good teaching of our religion. When we teach our students, you may share the same religion, you may not share the same religion with your student, but everybody would agree to everything which is good. All right, so those are the things that you could actually relate, and you could actually ask your students to reflect what that 21st century values are we actually targeting when we are doing this activity. So employ the differentiated instruction, and you need to also provide feedback. to my mind, when you ask your students to do things, and yet you are very reserved in giving your feedback, that is where the teaching cycle and the teaching and learning cycle is not a continuum, because students need to have feedback from the teachers so that they know what else do they need to improve on, or they need to know their strength so that they can manipulate or rather leverage on that strength. And when it comes to the third stage, post stage, emphasize on the students' achievement, celebrate, no matter how little your students' improvement has been in that class, show them love, show them that you are celebrating even a small success. They might have made mistakes, but what is it that they did right? So that needs to be highlighted. So you need to be embracing love. You need to be showing that you are excited about your students, and so on and so forth. So not just celebrate the performance, but also celebrate their feelings. If you could see that the students are a bit anxious, or they are shying away, or their anxiety level is very high, they start to think that they are not doing well as much as their friends are doing. So this is when you need to reach out to the student and start talking to them, reminding them to look at what they are good at, not just to focus on what they are yet, areas that need to move on, but also to look at what they are good at. So again, the reflection on action is something which is very, very important. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I'm about to finish, God willing. So these are some of the teaching techniques or methods. Ladies and gentlemen, I like to suggest when we interact with our students, please make sure that our presence is felt by our student. When you teach them, you look into their eyes. Make sure you think, if you've got 40 students or 50 students in your class, make everybody think that you have looked at them, even though it's quite impossible to look at them, right? But what we do is we've got eye contact, maintaining rapport. That's a trick that we learned when we did our methodology courses last time, right? And for student teacher, look into this, the fact that how important it is for you to make sure that the students think that you looked at them. So your presence is felt by them. And also they are present. You appreciate each and every one of them, right? Call them by their name, address them by their name. Just crack a joke in between. Laugh with them, not laugh at them. Laugh with them. Be that little person that you could be that child that you could be when you are with your student. But of course, do not lose your wisdom, yeah? Empowering. Your trust need to be given to the students. They have been away via remote learning. They are back in your class now. The crisis is still there. So how is it that you can still maintain your trust, which you have given them 2.5 years ago, since 2.5 years ago? And make sure that their responsibilities are realized. When they are able to actually perform, when they need to be independent, they come back to you and they actually share their work. Celebrate that. Highlight the fact that they were on their own when they did this. Highlight on the fact that they made it on their own and they were brave to go through all this. So all the things that sometimes we tend to forget doing in our class, and evaluating your sincerity must also, not just your presence must be felt by the students, but your sincerity when you give the feedback. Don't just give feedback for the sake of, oh, that's my job to give you feedback. But there must be real intention why that is the feedback that you give to your students. So it's the sincerity when you give the feedback. And their personal achievement, though, as I said earlier, not just about performance achievement, but their personal achievement. If you know your students more than just as a student in your class, meaning to say you know their family background, they are the eldest son, or maybe the eldest child, or maybe the youngest one, or maybe they got parents who are working away, not with them, they've got separated parents, for example. Those are the things that should be at the back of your mind when you talk to them, when you give them feedback, when you interact with them. So this is why I say that sincerity is felt when you are really concerned about your students. Okay, move on to the next slide, please. So in interacting, I have some suggestions still. Less is more. Talk less. Let the student talk more. Change the role when interacting. And let the students lead the discussion at times, and provide activities that could, make the students display their understanding. In other words, allow them to make them a demo, model it out, role play, do that role play, come back with a prototype, So, and then ask them to say, what are the challenges? How did they overcome that? How are they working as a team? All the adjectives, all the verbs that they produce when they describe what happened are the things that you could highlight to love. You know, when we're talking about human values, it begins with love. And then, and if we could go to the next slide, please, when we talk about empowering, these are some of the things that you can actually give to your students, you know, learning log, portfolio, poster, presentation, scrapbook, and checklist. Let them compile that information and let it be to their creativity. If they want to cut and paste pictures, photos, diagrams, if they want to have it digital, they want to have it, something which is tangible, allow them, because it's their creativity. And for every single masterpiece that they share with you, you show how excited you are to look at it. You know, as simple as it can be or as exhaustive as it can be, they are equally beautiful in your eyes. So this is when I think when you do that, let's not forget, you are targeting high order thinking on top of the lower order thinking. You are also highlighting the human values. You're highlighting the fact that this is actually for the goodness of you when you become a better person each and every single day. We're talking about day, not just by the year, not just by finishing the program, each and every single day. Okay, next slide, please. Evaluating, remember earlier on I talked about giving feedback. So this is when I believe that we need to give the holistic, both analytical, but most importantly also holistic. And they need to be constructive comments, not the destructive ones. If you know that your students are not performing well, how is it that you say things to your students to actually show them that they can do it still? Life does not end. The world does not come to a standstill just because they fail that test. So how is it that you make them realize that it's a journey? Learning is a journey. It's something that we are making ourselves a better person each and every single day. So that kind of sentiment you need to have deep down in your heart. And remember, learning is all about connecting the dots. But of course, when you want to connect with the students, it starts with your emotion. It starts with emotionally. Okay, next slide. Thus, the first order of business is to fill yourself with the soul of teaching, which begins with what and how. It's like, why you're doing it in the first place. Are you loving your job as a teacher? I mean, do what you love what you do. That's another slogan that I always remind myself. So if you do not love teaching, you're just doing it because that is something that you can sustain your life, that you have an earning every end of the month, you have something that you can sustain your family. I think that's wrong. The first thing that should come to our mind is the love for the sake of our students, to make a person a better person each and every single day. And it goes beyond our subject matter. So simply put, you need to love teaching, be passionate and compassionate. Next slide, please. That note, ladies and gentlemen, from the bottom line is when you teach thinking, or else you haven't taught at all. And that thinking need to be relatable to what is it at the end of the day for the greater good of himself as the individual person, the society, the community, the nation, and the world at large. And the next slide, I've got some quotation over here. Of course, you can't go back and change the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, but you can start now where you are and change the ending. And my last note, I would say my heartfelt gratitude. Thank you so much. But of course, I remain humbly as a learner and a thinker always, God willing. Thank you so much. Over to you, the host.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faizah. That was very informative and amazing discussion about teachers' craftsmanship, attuning human values amidst crisis through thinker teachers. We had a lot of takeaways, especially when Doctor said that the art of questioning is the heart of deep learning. Indeed, values are something we should also focus on, since values plays a significant part in the teaching learning process, and it is also an important element whenever we interact with others. And of course, the teaching methods and techniques we can utilize in our teaching journey. Thank you so much, Doctor. And also, thank you for reminding us to always love the field of teaching. And with that, this is the time when we are about to entertain questions from our dear delegates. So Dr. Faizah is here to answer your questions about the said discussion that we had. So we only have limited time for our Q&A, so only 2 delegates will ask their questions for Dr. Faizah. So you can now raise your hand and unmute yourselves or type your questions on our chat box for you to be recognized. So do we have any questions from our dear delegates? So, Doctor, our delegates are extending their warm thanks to you. Yeah, indeed, it was a very wonderful discussion. Yes, that was very good, Doctor. So I think we don't have any questions and it was all clear already. So, Farah, can you continue now?
Okay. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Faizah, for being with us today and for sharing a very wonderful and informative discussion. I am so delighted to see my lecturer as one of the speakers here. And so